Helen Morrison, a retired teacher, opens her home to her daughter Rebecca's struggling family, expecting love and gratitude. Initially, the house brims with joy as Helen bonds with her grandchildren, Emma and Joshua. But soon, Rebecca and her husband David subtly seize control, rearranging Helen's life, finances, and even her bedroom. Their plan to take ownership of her house under the guise of helping unravel as Helen uncovers their lies about urgent repairs. Torn between family loyalty and her independence, Helen faces a chilling betrayal. Will she reclaim her life or lose everything to those she loves most? If Helen's story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales. Your support keeps us sharing stories that matter. Click the button now and don't miss tomorrow's special reveal. Another unforgettable journey awaits. Tell us where you're tuning in from and join our community today. I lingered in the threshold of my former master bedroom, my gaze fixed on Rebecca, my daughter, as she meticulously arranged a bouquet of fresh flowers on the nightstand with the poise of someone who belonged there. The sting of irony wasn't lost on me. Those peonies, vibrant and fragrant, were from the garden I'd poured my soul into for 15 years, coaxing each bloom from the earth with my own sweat and care. Rebecca didn't even glance up when I cleared my throat, the sound feeble against the weight of her indifference. "Mom, could you close the door on your way out? David and I need some privacy to discuss our renovation plans," she said, her voice cool and detached, as if I were a maid who'd wandered too far from her duties. Renovation plans for my house. The words echoed in my chest, slicing deeper than any blade could. This was the home, the one I'd clawed my way to own after her father walked out when she was 12, leaving us with nothing but debt and broken promises. I'd worked 3 jobs, waitressing, tutoring, cleaning, to keep this roof over our heads. In this house, I'd held Rebecca through her nightmares, her face pressed into my shoulder as she trembled. I'd sat at the kitchen table until midnight, helping her with algebra and history projects. I'd cheered at every milestone, her first wobbly steps, her high school graduation, her college acceptance letter. This house had been the backdrop to our shared triumphs and tears. Now I was being dismissed from my own sanctuary, reduced to an inconvenience in the space I'd built. I pulled the door shut, the soft click resonating like a gavel in my heart, and shuffled down the narrow hallway. Family photos lined the walls, each one a snapshot of a life I no longer recognized. In them, Rebecca's smile was wide and unguarded, her arms slung around me, her eyes brimming with a love and respect I'd once believed was unshakable. Now those same eyes slid past me as if I were a shadow, insubstantial and unseen. The woman staring back from the hallway mirror was a stranger, Helen Morrison, 62, grandmother of 2, retired elementary school teacher, and now apparently an unwelcome guest in her own home. My gray hair hung limp, my clothes creased from nights spent on a thin mattress in the basement. When had I become this hollow version of myself? When had I stopped standing up for the life I'd fought so hard to create? The basement, where I'd been relegated for the past 2 months, was a far cry from the warmth of the upstairs. It was damp, the air heavy with the musty scent of old concrete and mildew. The single mattress on the floor was barely wider than a cot, its springs creaking under my weight. The thin blanket I clutched did little to fend off the February chill that seeped through the foundation walls, wrapping me in a cold that felt as much emotional as physical. But the true pain wasn't in the discomfort of my surroundings. It was in Rebecca's voice, the casual cruelty that laced her words. She spoke to me as if I were a minor annoyance she was generously tolerating, a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Each syllable was a reminder of how far I'd fallen in her eyes, from beloved mother to invisible burden. It hadn't always been this way. The betrayal had crept in slowly, disguised as love and necessity. 6 months ago, Rebecca's voice had crackled through the phone, thick with tears and desperation. She and David were drowning financially. His construction business had crumbled under the weight of an economic downturn, and they were months behind on their mortgage. With little Emma just starting kindergarten and baby Joshua barely toddling, they were staring down foreclosure, their lives unraveling at the seams. "Mom, I don't know what else to do," she'd sobbed, her voice breaking. We might lose everything. Emma's finally settled at school, and Joshua, we can't uproot them now. I know it's a lot to ask, but could we stay with you just for a few weeks until David gets back on his feet? Her words had pierced my heart. This was my daughter, my baby girl, the child I'd raised alone after her father decided family life was too confining for his restless spirit. I'd worked myself to the bone to ensure she never went without, taking on extra tutoring sessions, working weekend catering gigs to pay for her dance lessons, summer camps, and college tuition. Rebecca was my greatest achievement, the living proof that I'd done something right despite the odds. Of course, sweetheart, I'd said without a second thought. This house is always open to you and the kids. We'll figure it out together. The decision felt as natural as breathing. I was her mother. I would always be her safe harbor. That first week felt like a gift from the universe. The house, so quiet since Rebecca had moved out 8 years earlier, burst back to life with the sound of children's laughter. Emma, with her bright eyes and gap-toothed grin, helped me bake cookies in the kitchen, standing on a step stool just as her mother had decades before. Joshua took his first unsteady steps across the living room carpet, his chubby hands grasping for the same wooden blocks Rebecca had once stacked into wobbly towers. Even David seemed like a blessing in those early days. He was grateful, respectful, eager to contribute. He mowed the lawn, fixed a leaky faucet I'd been ignoring for months, and insisted on cooking dinner several nights a week, his spaghetti sauce filling the house with warmth. He called me Mom Helen, a nickname that made my heart swell, and asked about my book club, my volunteer work at the literacy center, my day-to-day life with a sincerity that felt genuine. For the first time in years, I wasn't just an aging woman rattling around a too-big house. I was part of a family again. Rebecca, too, was the daughter I'd always dreamed of having as an adult. She sought my advice on everything: Emma's struggles at school, Joshua's nap schedule, her own career crossroads. We spent long evenings talking after the kids were asleep, sprawled on the couch with mugs of tea, sharing stories and laughing over memories. She pulled out old photo albums, marveling at pictures of her childhood she'd forgotten. Her in a too-big ballet costume, her blowing out birthday candles, her clinging to me on her first day of school. When she hugged me goodnight, she held on tightly, whispering, "Thank you for saving us, Mom. I don't know what we'd have done without you." Those words were a balm to my soul, wrapping me in a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. This was what I'd worked for, sacrificed for, dreamed of during all those lonely years. My daughter needed me, trusted me, loved me. I wasn't just a relic of her past. I was essential, cherished, home. The children wove themselves into my heart with effortless ease. Emma would climb into my bed on Saturday mornings, her small body curled against mine, as we watched cartoons and nibbled on cinnamon toast I made just for her. Joshua's face would light up when I walked through the door, his tiny hands reaching for me as he babbled Gamma Helen in a voice that could melt stone. I spoiled them shamelessly. Extra bedtime stories, spontaneous ice cream runs, the kind of boundless love only a grandmother can give. David's gratitude felt authentic too. He'd pull me aside to thank me, his voice earnest. "You're an angel, Mom Helen," he'd say. "Most mothers-in-law wouldn't be this understanding. Rebecca's lucky to have you, and so are we." He'd even started calling me Mom instead of Mrs. Morrison, a small gesture that touched me more than I could express. Rebecca began including me in decisions that felt meaningful. She asked for my thoughts on Emma's teacher conferences, sought my advice on Joshua's sleep routine, and even consulted me about her own job prospects. For the first time in years, I felt seen, valued, indispensable. But beneath the surface, something was shifting, something I wouldn't see clearly until it was too late. The days had taken on a new rhythm, one that filled my heart with a warmth I hadn't known I'd been missing. My daughter Rebecca, her husband David, and their 2 children, Emma and Joshua, had moved into my home during a rough patch in their lives. What started as a temporary arrangement blossomed into something that felt like a second chance at family, a chance to be at the center of their world. The house, once too quiet and orderly, now hummed with life. Toys littered the living room floor like colorful confetti, bringing a vibrancy to spaces that had felt sterile for far too long. The refrigerator, once bare except for a few magnets, was now a gallery of Emma's crayon drawings and Joshua's finger-painted masterpieces. The sound of cartoon jingles and the children's laughter wove through weekend mornings, replacing the hollow ticking of the clock that had once been my only companion. Even my neighbors noticed the change, their smiles warm as they remarked on how the house seemed to glow with the energy of a family again. Every moment with them felt like a gift. I'd forgotten what it was like to feel truly needed, to be the anchor for the people I loved most. Rebecca and I would spend afternoons in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and swapping stories about her job interviews or the quirky outfits she was considering. We'd haul grocery bags in from the car, laughing as we tried to balance them all in one trip, then cook meals that filled the house with savory aromas. On lazy Sundays, we'd kneel side by side in the garden, dirt smudging our hands as the kids darted around us, their giggles rising like music. I wasn't just Gran or Mom Helen. I was the one they turned to for comfort, for advice, for a listening ear when the world felt too heavy. For the first time since Rebecca left for college, I wasn't wandering through a house too big for one, cooking solitary dinners, or talking to the walls just to hear a voice. I was whole again, my purpose restored in the chaos and love of family life. The weeks stretched into months, but I didn't mind. How could I? This was everything I'd longed for without even realizing it. David's business was clawing its way back from the brink, and he'd reassure me with a hopeful grin that big contracts were just around the corner. "Soon we'll be out of your hair, Mom Helen," he'd say. But the truth was, I didn't want them gone. The thought of returning to an empty house felt unbearable. Rebecca started asking me to babysit more often so she and David could steal a few hours for date nights, a chance to mend the cracks in their marriage. I was overjoyed to help. Those evenings with Emma and Joshua were pure magic, building blanket forts that sprawled across the living room, popping popcorn for Disney movie marathons, and telling them stories about their mom's childhood that sent them into fits of laughter, begging for just one more. As I tucked them into bed, their small hands clutching mine, I'd look around at the toys scattered on the coffee table, the tiny shoes by the door, the sippy cups drying in the kitchen, and feel a deep, unshakable contentment. This was what a home was meant to be: messy, loud, and bursting with love. The arrangement worked for all of us. Since they weren't paying rent, Rebecca and David covered groceries and utilities, which eased my monthly expenses more than I'd expected. For the first time in years, I was squirreling away extra money into savings. Feeding a family of 5 meant bulk buying, which stretched our dollars further and filled our plates with hearty, home-cooked meals. It felt like a win for everyone. Rebecca even started talking about the future in ways that warmed my heart. "Mom, it's so nice having you around," she'd say, her arm linked through mine as we watched the kids chase each other in the backyard. "Emma loves you helping with her homework, and Joshua's so happy with you reading him bedtime stories." I didn't realize how much we all needed this. Her words were a balm to the quiet fears I'd carried for years, that I was becoming a burden, calling too often, craving too much of her time. Now I knew I was still vital, still a source of joy and stability for the people I loved most. The loneliness that had shadowed me for so long felt like a fading dream. Even David began to float the idea of making this permanent. "Why should you be alone in this big house, Mom Helen?" he'd ask, his voice earnest. "We're better together, like a built-in support system." The idea sent a thrill through me, though I tried not to let it show too much. Maybe this was how families were meant to thrive in today's world. Generations living under one roof, sharing the load and the love. The children were flourishing too. Emma's grades had climbed since I started helping her with homework every evening, her confidence growing with each correct answer. Joshua's vocabulary was exploding, no doubt because he had 3 adults showering him with attention instead of 2. Both kids seemed more settled, more secure, wrapped in the warmth of a full house. Even my own health was better. Chasing after toddlers and lugging school project supplies kept me active in ways I hadn't been in years. My doctor noticed it at my last checkup, marveling at my lower blood pressure and newfound energy. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," she said with a smile. I couldn't help but laugh. Chasing grandkids was my secret weapon. The only shadow was the financial strain. Groceries for five were no small expense, and the kids' needs seemed endless. New shoes every few months, school supplies, birthday gifts for friends, field trip fees. Rebecca and David contributed what they could, but David's income was still shaky, and I often found myself dipping into my savings to cover the gaps. Yet, when Emma wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "I love you, Grandma Helen," or when Joshua dozed off in my lap during story time, those worries melted away. The money was just a detail, a small price to pay for the want of being needed, of being loved. Rebecca saw it too. "I don't know why everyone doesn't live like this," she'd say as we washed dishes together after dinner. "It's so much easier with more hands, and the kids are soaking up all this love." Her words echoed my own thoughts, and in those moments, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, surrounded by the beautiful chaos of family. In those fleeting, radiant weeks, my home pulsed with life, a sanctuary reborn from the ashes of solitude. Every corner echoed with the laughter of my grandchildren, Emma and Joshua, their presence a balm to the quiet that had once suffocated me. My daughter, Rebecca, her husband, David, and their children had moved in nearly 3 months ago, and with them came a warmth I hadn't felt in decades. The house, once a hollow shell, brimmed with purpose. Crayon scribbles adorned the fridge, toys littered the living room, and the aroma of shared dinners lingered in the air. I poured my soul into every moment, savoring the chaos, believing we were weaving a tapestry of memories that would bind us forever. I dreamed they'd stay, that we'd face life's trials as a united family. My heart alight with the certainty that I was loved, needed, cherished. Yet, beneath that fragile bliss, a shadow loomed, one I couldn't see until it shattered everything I held dear, revealing a betrayal so profound it would force me to question the very meaning of family. On a crisp Tuesday morning in late October, the first fracture appeared, subtle but sharp, slicing through the warmth of my routine. I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, the kitchen alive with the sizzle of batter and the sweet scent of breakfast. I hummed softly, my heart buoyant with the simple joy of caring for my family I love so much. Emma sat at the table, her brow furrowed as she tackled her spelling homework. While Joshua, in his high chair, babbled gleefully, his tiny hands smearing banana across his cheeks in gleeful chaos. These were the moments that anchored me, the ones that made me feel whole. Then Rebecca entered, her work clothes pressed, her gaze fixed on her phone, a faint scowl betraying her distraction. She snatched a piece of toast, biting into it absently before speaking. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her words sharp, slicing through the morning's peace. I turned, spatula in hand, a smile still curving my lips. "Of course, honey. What's up? Thinking of redoing the living room? I'd love to help pick out some paint colors." My voice was eager, ready to dive into whatever project she envisioned. But David's heavy footsteps announced his arrival, his work boots thudding softly, his coffee mug clutched in one hand. The glance they shared, a fleeting, loaded exchange, sent a chill through me, though I couldn't name why. "It's about how we're living here," Rebecca said, her voice carefully neutral, like she was navigating a minefield. "We've been here almost 4 months, and we're starting to feel like we're overcrowding your space. You've been so kind, but we need to plan for the long haul." My heart stuttered, a cold dread pooling in my chest. Were they leaving? The thought of the house falling silent, of losing the daily symphony of laughter and footsteps, made my throat tighten. "You're not overcrowding anything," I said quickly, my voice trembling with urgency. "I love having you here. This house is a home again because of you." My words were raw, a plea wrapped in gratitude. David set his mug down with a deliberate clink, clearing his throat. "That's what we wanted to discuss, Helen," he said, his tone smooth but tinged with something I couldn't place. "Instead of us moving out and leaving you alone in this big house, we're thinking we could make this more permanent, more official." Relief surged through me, so potent I gripped the counter to steady myself. "You'd stay? Really?" My voice cracked, hope flooding my chest as I pictured years of family Christmases and summer barbecues. "It'd need some adjustments," Rebecca said, her voice taking on a brisk, almost corporate edge I'd never heard her use with me. "We'd want to contribute more, take on bigger responsibilities. David's business is picking up, so we could handle the mortgage, taxes, utilities, everything. I nodded, trying to process their offer, but a nagging discomfort stirred within me. Their generosity felt rehearsed, their eyes avoiding mine in a way that made my skin prickle. "That's so thoughtful," I said, my words careful. "But this is my home. I've always managed the bills just fine." Another look passed between them, longer, heavier, and David stepped forward, his face breaking into a smile I'd later recognize as his salesman charm, the one he used to close deals. "Here's the thing, Helen," he said, his voice warm but calculated. "We've looked into it, and we think there's a more efficient way to do this. With my income stabilizing and the kids needing a stable home, we could take over as the primary residence. You'd still live here naturally, but we'd manage the big decisions. Maintenance, finances." The pancakes were burning now, the bitter smell jolting me. I turned off the stove, my hands shaking as I moved the pan. "I don't think I understand," I murmured, my voice barely audible. Rebecca's face softened, but her tone shifted to the patient cadence she used with her children. "Mom, you're getting older. You shouldn't have to worry about roof repairs or property taxes. We could lift those burdens off you. You could just relax, enjoy your retirement." The words stung, each one a quiet dismissal, stripping away the warmth of moments before. Getting older, burdens, relax. These weren't expressions of love. They were a subtle push toward irrelevance. "I'm only 62, I said, my voice faint but firm. "I can handle my home just fine." "Of course you can," David said quickly, his tone placating, almost condescending. "But why should you? We're family. Let us take care of you." Emma glanced up from her homework, her eyes wide with concern. "Grandma Helen, are you okay? You look sad." Her words pierced me, and I forced a smile, ruffling her hair. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just grown-up talk." But I wasn't fine. That conversation had shifted something fundamental, a fault line cracking beneath my trust. The way they'd clearly planned this in private, the calculated delivery of their solution, the assumption I was too fragile to lead my own life. It felt like a betrayal in disguise. In the days that followed, the unease festered, fed by details I'd once ignored. Rebecca had begun rearranging furniture without asking, moving my mother's cherished armchair to a dusty corner, replacing it with a modern ottoman. When I questioned it, she smiled breezily, saying she was making the space work better for the family. Yeah, David started measuring windows, scribbling notes about essential upgrades, never once asking my opinion. Each small act felt like a chisel chipping away at my place in my own home. At night, I lay awake, replaying their words, searching for clues I'd missed. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that my family, the ones I'd sacrificed everything for, couldn't be maneuvering me out of my own life. But the doubt had taken root, and it was growing, whispering that the love I trusted might not be what it seemed. The shift in the household was subtle at first, like a slow tide eroding a familiar shore, but it grew undeniable with each passing day. My daughter Rebecca and her husband David had moved into my home years ago, a temporary arrangement born of their financial struggles and my desire to keep family close. I welcomed them, opened my doors, and shared my space, believing we were building a life together. But now, standing in the kitchen I'd tended for decades, I felt like a guest in my own home. My voice drowned out by their plans and their certainty. They spoke of the house as if it were already theirs, tossing around phrases like, "when we remodel the kitchen," or "after we expand the master bathroom." The word "if" had vanished from their vocabulary, replaced by a resolute "when" that left no room for discussion. These weren't dreams or hypotheticals. They were decisions, made without consulting me, as though I were a bystander to my own life. When I tried to join their conversations, offering thoughts about the home I'd lived in for over 15 years, my home, filled with memories of raising Rebecca, of holiday dinners and quiet evenings, they'd nod politely, their eyes glazing over with practiced patience. Then they'd carry on, my words dissolving into the air like steam from a forgotten kettle. I felt the sting of a dismissal, a quiet ache in my chest, as if my opinions were mere noise, irrelevant to the future they were crafting. The children, Emma and Joshua, were my heart's joy, the bright spots in my days. but even they were slipping from my orbit. Emma, with her curious eyes and endless questions, used to come to me for help with her homework, her pencil tapping the table as we worked through math problems together. Now Rebecca gently redirected her to ask her mother or father, as if my knowledge was outdated, my role unnecessary. Joshua's bedtime stories, once our sacred ritual, were now Rebecca's domain. She'd sweep in with a bright smile, explaining she wanted to be more involved in his nighttime routine. I could still see Joshua's small face, torn between his love for me and his loyalty to his mother, as he clutched his favorite book, waiting for her to read. I'd smile, hiding the pang in my heart, and step back, feeling the weight of being replaced in those quiet, intimate moments. Rebecca's words were kind but firm. "We really appreciate everything you've done, Mom, but David and I need to establish ourselves as the primary authority figures. It's better for the kids to have clear boundaries about who makes the decisions." The message landed like a stone in my stomach. I wasn't just their grandmother anymore. I was being demoted, relegated to a supporting role in their lives. My love for them deemed secondary to their parents' authority. My bedroom situation became another quiet wound. When Rebecca and David first moved in, I'd given up the master suite to give them privacy, moving into the guest room with its modest twin bed and small window. It was meant to be temporary, a gesture of generosity. But now Rebecca spoke of it as permanent, her voice casual but calculated. "You seem so comfortable in the smaller room," she said one evening, her tone light as if discussing the weather. "And honestly, with David's early work schedule and the baby waking up sometimes, it's probably better if you're not right next door. The master suite just makes more sense for a family with young children." The guest room was pleasant enough, with its pale blue walls and simple furnishings, but it was half the size of my old bedroom, lacking the walk-in closet and ensuite bathroom I'd cherished for years. More than that, it felt like an exile, a physical manifestation of my shrinking place in the household. Lying in that narrow bed at night, staring at the ceiling, I felt the walls closing in, not just around my body, but around my identity. This wasn't just a room, it was a symbol of my displacement, a reminder that I was no longer the heart of this home. Financial discussions, once filled with gratitude for my generosity, took on a new edge. Rebecca and David began framing their presence as a benefit to me, as if I were the one gaining from their stay. "Your utility bills must be so much lower now that we're splitting everything," Rebecca would say with a smile, as if I should be grateful for their contribution. "And having David here to handle maintenance and repairs is probably saving you thousands of dollars a year." The words stung, implying I was somehow indebted to them for living in my own house. When I pointed out that my grocery expenses had tripled, that I'd been quietly covering the children's school supplies, extracurricular fees, and countless small costs, Rebecca's face flickered with surprise, then a faint trace of hurt. "Mom, we never asked you to do that," she said, her voice soft but pointed. "If money's tight for you, we can adjust our arrangement. Maybe you could contribute a set amount each month for food and household expenses instead of just buying whatever you think we need." And the suggestion hit me like a slap. Pay them to live in my own home? The idea left me speechless, my heart pounding with a mix of disbelief and betrayal. Somehow, without my noticing, the dynamic had flipped. I was no longer the generous mother helping her struggling daughter. I was being cast as the dependent, the elderly relative who needed to justify her place. David's demeanor toward me shifted too, in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. The warm Mom Helen greetings, once filled with affection, had cooled to polite daws as if I were a tenant rather than family. He stopped asking about my day, my hobbies, my life, treating me more like a roommate than the woman who'd welcomed him into her home. When I tried to contribute to discussions about household decisions, whether it was fixing the leaky faucet or choosing new paint for the living room, he'd listen with a tight smile, his patience a thin veneer over his disinterest. Then he'd proceed with whatever he and Rebecca had already decided, my voice erased from the equation. Each interaction chipped away at my confidence, leaving me to wonder when I'd become so invisible. The breaking point came over Thanksgiving, a holiday I'd hosted every year since Rebecca was a child. It was my tradition, my joy, a time when my kitchen came alive with the sense of roasting turkey and my grandmother's stuffing recipe, a recipe Rebecca had once begged me to teach her. I'd already bought the turkey, made lists of side dishes, and started planning the table settings, my heart swelling with anticipation. But one evening, as I sat at the kitchen table reviewing recipes, Rebecca approached, her expression gentle but resolute. "Mom, David and I have been talking," she began, "and we think it might be better if we handle Thanksgiving this year. With everything changing around here, it feels like the right time for us to start taking on more hosting responsibilities." I looked up from my grandmother's handwritten recipe. The ink faded, but the words still vivid in my memory. "But I always host Thanksgiving," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. "It's one of my favorite traditions." Rebecca's smile was kind but unyielding. "I know, and you do such a beautiful job," she said. "But you've been doing it for so many years. Don't you think you deserve a break? Let us take care of everything this time. You can just relax and enjoy the meal." The words cut deeper than she could know. I wasn't just being relieved of a task, I was being retired from my role as the family's heart, pushed aside to make way for the younger generation. My traditions, my recipes, my love poured into those meals. They no longer mattered. I was being invited to attend a holiday in my own home as a guest, not the host. That night, lying in the guest room, I heard Rebecca and David's voices drifting through the wall from what used to be my bedroom. Their tones were low, businesslike, filled with the confidence of people charting their future. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. They were planning, deciding, shaping the life of this house, my house, without me. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. Small changes I'd overlooked began to form a clearer picture. David had started opening my mail, claiming he was organizing household paperwork. Rebecca screened my phone calls, deciding which were urgent enough to pass along, as if I were too frail to handle my own affairs. My suggestions for dinner menus or weekend plans were met with polite nods and then ignored, my voice reduced to background noise. The most painful truth was that my usefulness was being systematically erased. Every role I'd played, grandmother, matriarch, provider, was being quietly handed over to Rebecca and David. I was becoming redundant, surplus to requirements in the home I'd built, the life I'd lived. The weight of it pressed against my chest, a grief I couldn't name, as I lay in the dark, wondering how I'd become a stranger in my own story. When I voiced my worries to Rebecca, her response carried the kind of weary patience one might use with a fussy grandparent who's misplaced their glasses yet again. "Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion," she said, her tone soft but edged with exasperation. "We're family, you know? We're all just figuring out how to make this work, how to live together in a way that keeps everyone happy. No one's trying to shove you aside or take over your life. We love you and we're only thinking about what's best for all of us." Her words sounded so reasonable, so full of care, but they landed like stones in my chest. What was best for everyone, it seemed, didn't include my voice, my wishes, or to my rightful place as the head of my own home. I felt like I was being gently, lovingly pushed out of my own existence, smothered under a blanket of kindness, while my autonomy and dignity were quietly stripped away. The shift wasn't just in Rebecca's words or David's placating smiles. It echoed in the way my grandchildren began to treat me. Once they'd come running to me, their beloved Grandma Helen with tear-streaked faces or scraped knees, seeking comfort only I could give. They'd tug at my skirt, asking which storybook we should read or what game we'd play in the backyard. Now their eyes darted to Rebecca or David first, waiting for a nod of approval or a final word. My opinion, once a beacon for their little hearts, was now an afterthought. I was still their grandma, still loved, but no longer the one whose wisdom shaped their world. I was becoming a relic in their eyes, a cherished but powerless figure, like a favorite old doll tucked away on a shelf. The moment that broke my heart came one evening when Emma, my sweet, bright-eyed granddaughter, approached me with a question. "Grandma, can I have a sleepover with Sarah?" she asked, her voice bubbling with excitement. Before I could even respond, she added, "But I need to check with Mom and Dad first, because they make the real decisions." Her words were so casual, so matter-of-fact, as if this was just the natural order of things. But to me, they cut deeper than any argument or confrontation ever could. It wasn't defiance in her voice, it was acceptance. She'd already internalized that I was no longer the one in charge, that my authority had been replaced by her parents' rule. I stood there frozen as the weight of her words settled over me like a cold fog. My own granddaughter, the child I'd rocked to sleep countless nights, was unknowingly confirming my erasure from the heart of this family. I began to see it everywhere, this slow dismantling of my life. The daughter I'd raised to be fierce and independent was now using that strength to nudge me out of my own home. Rebecca, with her quick smiles and logical explanations, was rewriting the rules of our household, and I was no longer the author of its story. David, my son-in-law, who'd once called me an angel and thanked me for my warmth, now treated me like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome, tolerated, but not truly needed. Their actions were cloaked in kindness, their words dripping with concern, but the truth was undeniable. They weren't helping me, they were replacing me. They weren't easing my burdens, they were relieving me of my entire life. What hurt most was how convincing they were, even to me. Their explanations sounded so rational, so caring. They were taking responsibilities off my plate, they said, so I could enjoy my golden years without the stress of running a household. They were making sure I could rest, relax, and savor my time with family. Who could argue with such thoughtfulness? Who could push back against such love? But in the quiet of the guest room, now my permanent retreat, my exile within my own home, I knew the truth. I wasn't being cared for. I was being sidelined. I wasn't being freed from responsibility. I was being stripped of purpose. And the family I'd poured my heart into, the ones I'd sacrificed everything for, were orchestrating my disappearance with warm smiles and gentle voices. The worst part was my own helplessness. I could see the path they were leading me down, but every attempt to reclaim my place was met with soft resistance. When I tried to assert my authority, Rebecca would offer patient explanations about why their way was better, her voice so calm it made me question my own instincts. When I tried to hold on to the traditions that defined our family, the Sunday dinners I'd always cooked, the bedtime stories I'd always read, they were quietly redirected or delayed until I gave up. I was being erased, not with anger or cruelty, but with such skillful, gradual love that I almost felt guilty for resisting. I almost believed I should be grateful for being pushed out of my own life. Winter came early that year, and with it, a biting cold that seemed to mirror the chill in my heart. The guest room, with its thin walls and drafty windows, had always been cold, but now that it was my permanent home, its flaws were impossible to ignore. I'd mentioned the inadequate heating to David twice, asking if he could check the vents or perhaps bring in a space heater to ease the bone-deep chill. Both times he'd nodded vaguely, promising to take a look, but nothing changed. The room stayed cold, the air heavy with neglect. When I brought it up to Rebecca, dismissed my concern with a breezy confidence. "It's actually better to keep bedrooms cooler, Mom," she said, her tone light but final. "Hot rooms aren't great for sleep. You'll rest better this way." Her words were so assured, so wrapped in care, that I almost believed her. Almost. But I felt the truth in my shivering hands, in the way her dismissed my needs as if they were trivial. The real turning point came on a bleak December morning when I walked into the kitchen to find Rebecca and David bent over a stack of papers at my dining table. They glanced up as I entered, and for a moment their faces held the guilty look of children caught sneaking sweets before dinner. Rebecca's hands moved quickly, gathering the documents into a folder and sliding it out of sight. "Morning, Mom," she said, her smile too bright, too forced. "We were just going over some household budgeting. David's helping me get our finances in order." Her cheerfulness felt like a performance, and the word "our" stung like a slap. Since when had my personal affairs become their domain? I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands trembling slightly, not from age but from the sinking feeling in my chest. "Our finances?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "What kind of budgeting are we talking about?" David stood, stretching casually, but his movement seemed calculated, blocking my view of the folder Rebecca still held. "Just the usual stuff, Mom," he said, his voice smooth. "Utilities, maintenance, property taxes, boring adult things. We're just trying to keep the household running smoothly. Property taxes. My house. The house I'd paid for, loved, and built as a haven for this family. The coffee turned bitter on my tongue. If there's a financial issue, I should be part of the conversation, I said, my voice firmer now, though I felt like I was grasping at straws. Rebecca's laugh, bright and sharp, filled the room like a musical chime, but it had a cutting edge to it. Mom, you don't need to stress about this anymore, she said, her emphasis on anymore landing like a warning. We've got it covered. David's amazing with numbers. He handles all the financial planning for his business, you know. The word lingered, a reminder that my role in my own life was a thing of the past, something I'd somehow surrendered without signing a single paper. I sat down at my own table, uninvited, at the table where I'd once presided over family meals, and felt like an outsider in my own home. I'd like to know what's being discussed, I said, my voice quieter now, but no less resolute. This is still my house. David's smile was patient, almost pitying, the kind reserved for someone who don't quite grasp the rules of a game. Of course it's your house, Mom Helen, he said, his tone soothing but empty. You've been so generous letting us take on more, and we're just making sure everything's all good for everyone. That afternoon, while Rebecca was at work and David was supposedly off with clients, I decided to check my mail, a small daily ritual that tethered me to the world. For 15 years, I'd walked to that mailbox, sifting through bills and letters, feeling connected to the rhythm of life. But when I opened it, the box was empty. Not just no letters for me, but utterly bare, as if no mail had ever arrived at all. I stood there staring into the cold metal void, confusion crashing over me like a wave. My routine, my link to the outside world, had been severed, and I hadn't even noticed when it started. Every Wednesday, the mailbox at the end of the driveway came alive with the pulse of the outside world. Bills demanding attention, glossy ads promising savings, weekly grocery circulars I'd browse with a steaming mug of tea. It was my ritual, a small but vital thread connecting me to life beyond my front door. But that Wednesday, the mailbox was empty, its metal jaws silent. The postal service didn't skip houses. There was always something. When David strode through the door that evening, his briefcase heavy with the day's work, I couldn't keep the question inside. Where's the mail? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. He shrugged, hanging his jacket in the closet, my closet, once home to my coats alone, now crowded with his tailored blazers. Oh, I had it forwarded to a P.O. box, he said, his tone as casual as if he'd mentioned the weather. It's safer that way, keeps important stuff from getting lost or stolen. I'll grab it every few days and sort it. Safer. The word landed like a slap, as if my years of collecting mail from that box had been careless. But I like getting my own mail, I said, a flush of embarrassment creeping up my neck at how childish it sounded. It's part of my routine. My daily anchor, my small claim to independence. From the kitchen table, where she was guiding Emma through math homework, Rebecca looked up. Mom, David's just trying to help, she said, her voice soft but edged with authority, like she was reasoning with a stubborn child. Identity theft is a huge issue now. An unlocked mailbox is practically asking for trouble. Her words were logical, but they cut deep. My social security statements, my retirement updates, my handwritten letters from lifelong friends, those weren't our documents, as she implied, but mine. They were fragments of my life, not shared property for David to oversee. I wanted to argue to reclaim that small piece of myself, but Emma was there, her pencil scratching out fractions, her face intent. Making a fuss felt petty, so I bit my tongue. Just like that, my daily link to the world was severed, a quiet amputation I hadn't consented to. The isolation settled in like a slow fog, wrapping my days in a haze of disconnection. Phone calls that once came straight to me now passed through Rebecca's filter. Mom, Mrs. Patterson called about book club, she'd say, stirring a pot on the stove, her voice breezy. I told her you probably can't make it this month. You've seemed so tired lately. Tired? The word was a spark to my growing frustration. I wasn't tired, I was restless, a coil of anger and confusion tightening in my chest. Book club was my refuge, a place where I was still Helen Morrison, the retired teacher who could debate literature with wit and passion. Not just mom or grandma, a fading figure in someone else's story. Those evenings, filled with laughter and wine and lively arguments over plot twists, were a lifeline to the woman I'd always been. "I'm not tired," I said, my voice trembling with the effort to stay calm. "I want to go." Rebecca's face softened, her hand reaching out to press against my forehead, cool and clinical, as if I were a feverish child. "You've been doing so much for us," she said. "Maybe it's time to let some of those outside commitments go. Focus on family for a while." Family. The word felt like a demotion, a reduction of my vibrant life to a supporting role I hadn't auditioned for. My friendships, my passions, my identity, they weren't optional add-ons to be discarded like outgrown clothes. They were the roots that kept me steady, the threads that wove me into the fabric of the world. But Rebecca's concern was a fortress, cloaked in kindness, but unyielding. I felt like a tree being pruned, my branches trimmed to fit their vision of our household, my identity reshaped to serve their needs. The children's behavior began to shift, each change a small fracture in my heart. Emma, my sweet granddaughter, still loved me. I could see it in her shy, fleeting smiles. But there was a new distance in her eyes, a formality that hadn't existed before. When I offered to help with her family tree project, eager to share the stories I'd told her countless times, she hesitated. "I should probably ask Mom first," she said, her voice small, as if she'd been taught to keep me at a careful distance. Joshua, barely 2, with his toddling steps and boundless curiosity, was being gently redirected away from me. When he'd stumble and run to me, his chubby arms outstretched, Rebecca would swoop in, her voice bright and sharp. "Come to Mama, sweetie," she'd say, lifting him away. "Grandma's hands aren't as steady as they used to be." My hands were steady, steady enough to braid Emma's hair, to stir batter for cookies, and to turn the pages of a bedtime story. But the suggestion took root in Joshua's young mind, a seed of doubt that Grandma wasn't quite capable anymore. Each redirection was a quiet wound, a reminder that my place in their lives was being redefined without my input. The house itself began to betray me, its familiar contours warped by David's influence. My bedroom, once a sanctuary of carefully chosen furniture, was no longer mine. I came home one day to find my grandmother's antique dresser shoved into a corner, its delicate curves pressed against the wall like an afterthought. "We're optimizing the flow," David explained, his tone light, as if rearranging my history were a simple matter of logistics. The bed had been repositioned, blocking my view of the garden I'd tended for 15 years. The roses I'd pruned with care, the tulips I'd planted with Emma's tiny hands beside mine. The mirror was angled too high for me to use comfortably, and the bedside table was just out of reach. It was as if the room had been redesigned for someone else, someone whose needs didn't matter. I stood in the doorway, my chest tight with grief, staring at a space that no longer felt like home. My belongings began to disappear, not stolen but displaced, tucked away where I couldn't reach them. My favorite reading chair, where I'd spent countless evenings lost in novels, was banished to the basement. My collection of vintage cookbooks, each page stained with memories of family dinners, was boxed up and sent to the attic to make room for David's business files. My grandmother's china cabinet, once filled with delicate plates that had seen generations of celebrations, was emptied to display David's fishing trophies. "The kids might break the dishes," Rebecca said, her voice reasonable but final. Each change came with an explanation that sounded logical but felt like a betrayal. My life was being dismantled, piece by piece, my history erased to make room for their vision of order. The basement, once a shared space for storage and holiday decorations, became David's unofficial office. When I asked to retrieve my Christmas ornaments, the ones Emma had made in preschool, the delicate glass balls that had belonged to my mother, he waved me off. "I've got important paperwork down there," he said. "Maybe we should just buy new decorations this year. Something simpler, more modern. Simpler." The word cut deep. I didn't want modern. I wanted the ornaments that held our family's story, the ones Rebecca had crafted in Girl Scouts, the ones that sparked joy in Joshua's eyes when we hung them together. Those decorations weren't clutter. They were memories, tangible pieces of a past I was desperate to hold on to. "You're being sentimental," Rebecca said when I tried to explain, her voice gentle but dismissive. "Sometimes it's better to let go of things that are just cluttering up our lives. The kids will make new memories." "Our lives," she said, as if my memories were communal property, subject to a vote I hadn't been invited to cast. The financial control was the final blow, subtle but suffocating. Bills that had always come to me, property taxes, utilities, my credit card statements, were now handled by David. When I asked to see my property tax statement, he smiled, indulgent and dismissive. "Already taken care of, Helen," he said. "You don't need to worry about that stuff anymore." But I did worry. Those documents were mine, proof of my independence, my stake in this house I'd built over decades. Being shut out felt like being erased, my agency stripped away under the guise of care. I stood in my own home, surrounded by my family, and felt like a ghost, seen but not heard, present but not acknowledged. My life, my identity, my history were being rewritten, and I was powerless to stop it. The weight of my own home pressed against me, a place that once felt like a sanctuary now transformed into a labyrinth of subtle control. It was my house, my haven, built with decades of hard work and memories, yet I found myself grappling with an unsettling realization. I no longer held the reins. My financial obligations, the very threads that tied me to my independence, were slipping through my fingers. When I pressed David for the bank statements, insisting on my right to see the numbers that governed my life, I saw his composure crack, like thin ice under too much weight. "Listen, I'm doing this to help you," he said, his voice laced with a sharpness I hadn't heard before, a blade hidden beneath his usual calm. "You wanted us to step up, to take on more around here, and that's exactly what we're doing. But if you're going to hover over every detail, maybe we need to rethink this whole setup." His words carried a veiled threat, cloaked in practicality but unmistakable in their intent. Comply or risk losing them. The children I adored, the family I yearned to keep close, the purpose I'd carved out in nurturing them. The thought of that loss twisted in my chest, a quiet ache that made me question my resolve. It was manipulation dressed as care, a calculated move to keep me in line, and it stung like betrayal. Rebecca, on the other hand, wielded a softer touch, but her approach was no less potent. She'd perched beside me, her hand enveloping mine, her voice a soothing melody that belied the weight of her words. "Mom, I know this is tough. Change is never easy, especially as we get older," she'd say, her eyes brimming with what seemed like genuine concern. "David and I just want what's best for you. We want you to kick back, enjoy your retirement, and let go of all the stress of running everything on your own." That phrase, "as we get older," landed like a pebble in still water, rippling through my thoughts. It was a gentle nudge toward a narrative I didn't accept, a suggestion that I was fading, no longer capable of steering my own ship. At 62, I was vibrant, my mind sharp, my body strong. I wasn't teetering on the edge of frailty, yet their words painted me as someone who needed to be sheltered, guided, and protected from herself. Their story was taking root, reshaping reality around me. My objections, once firm and grounded, were now dismissed as stubbornness, or worse, confusion. The isolation crept in slowly, like a fog that thickens before you realize you're lost. My connection to St. Mark's Episcopal Church, a cornerstone of my life for over 2 decades, was quietly dismantled. I'd poured my heart into that community, serving on committees, organizing outreach programs, laughing with friends in the women's auxiliary. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was where I was Helen Morrison, a woman with purpose, not a burden to be managed. But suddenly, attending Sunday services became a logistical puzzle. David needed the car for unexpected work emergencies. Rebecca had appointments that clashed with my usual service times. The children's activities demanded my presence at home, babysitting during the hours I'd normally be at church. Each week brought a fresh excuse, a new barrier to the one place where I felt truly seen. "Why don't we find you a nice service to watch on TV?" Rebecca suggested one day, her tone bright and helpful. "It's so much easier than getting all dressed up and driving across town. Plus, you won't have to worry about bad weather or feeling obliged to stick around for coffee hour when you're worn out. Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they assumed I was fragile, too tired to manage a routine I'd cherished for years. I wasn't exhausted. I wasn't daunted by a drizzle or a chilly morning. What I craved was the warmth of familiar faces, the sound of hymns rising around me, conversations that didn't revolve around what David and Rebecca deemed appropriate for me. I needed to be Helen, not the elderly relative they were reshaping in their minds. When I finally arranged a ride to church with my friend Margaret, a small act of defiance that felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, Rebecca's response was swift and cloaked in worry. "Mom, I'm really not sure it's safe for you to ride with someone else," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "What if there's an accident? What if Margaret has a health scare while she's driving? You could both get hurt." Her voice was gentle, but the message was clear. I couldn't be trusted to make decisions about my own safety. My judgment was suspect. My autonomy a risk they couldn't allow. Every step I took toward independence was met with a wall of loving concern, each brick laid with precision to keep me in place. By February, the truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. I was a prisoner in my own home, confined by caretakers who insisted they were my protectors. My mail was intercepted, my finances controlled without my input. My social ties were severed one by one, until I was left with only the voices of David and Rebecca to define my world. Even my physical space felt foreign, rearranged to suit their vision of what was best for me. The breaking point came on a crisp Tuesday afternoon when I decided to walk to Miller's Market, a small grocery store 6 blocks away. It was a routine I'd followed countless times, a simple errand that brought fresh air, a stretch of my legs, and a fleeting sense of freedom. I needed milk and bread, ordinary items that shouldn't require permission or oversight. I bundled up against the chill, grabbed my purse and reusable bags, and headed for the door, my heart lifting at the thought of a moment to myself. David appeared as if summoned, his presence blocking the doorway, his face etched with concern. "Where are you going, Mom Helen?" he asked, his tone careful but probing. "Just to Miller's for a few things," I replied, forcing my voice to stay light. "We're out of milk." His frown deepened, and I felt the air shift, heavy with his disapproval. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said. "The sidewalks are icy today, and it's supposed to snow this afternoon. What if you slip? What if you get caught in a storm?" I glanced out the window at the clear sky, the dry pavement, the weather forecast that promised only a faint chance of flurries later. "I'll be careful," I said, holding my ground. "It's just 6 blocks." "Let me take care of it," he offered, his voice smooth but firm. "Make a list and I'll grab whatever you need later. It's not safe for you to walk that far in this weather." I pushed back, my frustration bubbling up. "I need the exercise, David, and I like picking out my own groceries." His expression shifted, a mask of patience settling over his features. "Mom, Helen, I get that you want to feel independent, but Rebecca and I can't take the chance of something happening to you out there alone. If you got hurt, we'd never forgive ourselves." The words were a cage, their bars forged from concern but no less confining. My ability to judge my own limits was dismissed, overwritten by their narrative of my fragility. "I'm going to the store," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I'm a grown woman, and I can decide for myself if it's safe to walk 6 blocks. David's face tightened, a flicker of something harder passing through his eyes. "I really can't let you do that, Mom Helen," he said, his tone final. "Not in good conscience." The words sliced through the air, sharp and unyielding. "Can't let me." This man, living under my roof, sustained by the resources I'd built, was standing in my doorway, declaring that I was not free to leave. The realization settled in my bones, cold and heavy. I was no longer the master of my own life. The realization hit me like a cold wave, washing over every corner of my mind as I stood there, staring into David's unyielding eyes. For the first time, I saw my life with brutal clarity. Not as the cherished matriarch surrounded by a doting family, but as a carefully managed asset, stripped of agency and maneuvered into compliance under the guise of care. My heart ached with the weight of it, a dull throb that pulsed with every breath. I wasn't being loved. I was being controlled. My independence eroded by those who swore it was all for my own good. Their words, their actions, their suffocating concern, it wasn't protection. It was a cage built brick by brick with smiles and assurances. That evening, when Rebecca returned home, David wasted no time recounting our earlier clash. I watched her stride into the living room, her face etched with worry, so practiced it almost seemed genuine. She sank onto the couch beside me, her hand reaching for mine in a gesture that felt more like an anchor than a comfort. "Mom," she began, her voice soft but laced with urgency, "David told me about today. I'm really worried about you. This defiance, it's not like you. Are you feeling all right? Maybe we should call to Richardson just to make sure nothing's going on medically." Defiance. The word landed like a slap. To them, my desire to hold on to some shred of autonomy, to run a simple errand, to make a choice for myself was a symptom, a red flag signaling some imagined decline. My chest tightened as I swallowed the urge to scream. How had it come to this? How had my assertion of basic rights become a disorder in their eyes, something to be diagnosed and medicated? I wanted to shake her, to demand she see me, not as a fragile relic, but as Helen Morrison, a woman who had raised a family, weathered loss, and built a life worth living. But her gaze held only pity, and it crushed me more than any argument could. That night, as I lay in the guest room that had become my prison, the truth unfurled in the darkness, sharp and unforgiving. This wasn't care. It wasn't love. It was a systematic dismantling of who I was, orchestrated by the very people who claimed to cherish me. They weren't cruel, not in the obvious ways. They didn't yell or threaten. Instead, they wielded reason like a weapon, framing every restriction as protection, every loss of freedom as an act of devotion. "It's for your safety," they'd say, their voices dripping with sincerity. "We just want what's best for you." And the most terrifying part was how convincing they were, not just to me, but to themselves. They believed they were saving me, even as they stripped away my dignity, my voice, myself. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a life that used to be mine. They didn't see me as a person anymore, but as a problem to be managed, a liability to be contained. My independence, once a source of pride, was now a luxury they deemed too risky to allow. I was fading, shrinking into their vision of what an elderly mother should be, grateful, obedient, and quietly diminishing until I was nothing but a shadow of myself, a warm body occupying space in a house that no longer felt like home. The thought clawed at my heart, a desperate panic that kept me awake. If I didn't fight back, if I didn't find a way to reclaim what was mine, I would vanish entirely. Helen Morrison would cease to exist, and no one would even notice. The conversation that crystallized this nightmare took place on a Thursday night in March. Earlier that day, the house had been alive with joy. Emma, my granddaughter, had lost her first tooth, and we'd celebrated with ice cream and tales of the tooth fairy. Her laughter had filled the air, bright and unburdened, and for a fleeting moment, I'd let myself believe that everything was as it should be. The warmth of that evening had lulled me, made me think our arrangement was perfect. A family woven together by love. But as the children were tucked into bed, Rebecca and David's request for a family meeting shattered that illusion. The words sent a chill through me and a premonition of something I wasn't ready to face. I settled into my old armchair, now shoved against the wall in a way that made it feel out of place, like me. David cleared his throat, his posture stiff with purpose, as he produced a folder he'd been carrying for days. "Mom, Helen," he said, his tone measured, "we need to talk about some practical matters regarding our living situation. Rebecca and I have been thinking a lot about the future, about what's best for everyone." Rebecca leaned forward, her face a mask of earnest concern. "Mom, you know how much we love having you here, how grateful we are for everything you've done, but we're starting to worry about some things." My stomach nodded. "What kind of things?" I asked, bracing for another lecture about my supposed frailties. David opened the folder, pulling out a stack of documents that looked official, their edges crisp and intimidating. "For starters, the house maintenance is becoming a real issue," he said. "The heating system is outdated, the roof needs repairs, and there are some foundation concerns that could turn into serious problems if we don't act soon." I blinked. confusion warring with unease. Foundation concerns? I've never noticed anything wrong. Rebecca's voice was gentle, almost too gentle as she chimed in. That's exactly what worries us, Mom. You might not be noticing things that would stand out to younger eyes. David's done some research, and there are definite structural issues that need professional attention. David nodded, spreading the documents across the coffee table like a prosecutor laying out evidence. I had a contractor friend stop by last week while you were napping. He did an informal assessment. The foundation has some settling that could cause major issues, and the electrical system isn't up to current code. My voice sharpened despite myself. Why didn't you tell me about this inspection? Rebecca's hand found mine, her touch meant to soothe but feeling like a tether. We didn't want to worry you unnecessarily, she said. We thought it was better to gather all the facts first, then come to you with solutions, not just problems. Solutions. The word twisted in my gut, a warning bell. What kind of solutions? I asked, my voice barely steady. David leaned back, adopting the patient tone he used with his construction clients. The repairs we're talking about are extensive and costly. We're looking at $60,000 to $80,000 just to bring everything up to basic safety standards. The number hit me like a fist, stealing my breath. $80,000. My savings were modest, carefully planned for a quiet retirement, not for massive renovations. My heart pounded as I struggled to process it. Are you sure these repairs are necessary? I asked, my voice small and unsteady. Rebecca squeezed my hand, her eyes full of conviction. Mom, we wouldn't bring this up if it wasn't serious. David knows construction, and he's really concerned about what he's seeing. We can't risk something happening to you or the children because we ignored safety issues. Safety issues. The children. The words were a masterstroke, pressing on my deepest fears. If something happened to Emma or Joshua because I'd been too stubborn, too frugal, I'd never forgive myself. But the truth was, I didn't have that kind of money. I don't have $80,000 just sitting around, I admitted, hating how vulnerable I sounded. David nodded, his expression sympathetic but resolute. We figured that might be the case, he said. That's why we wanted to talk tonight. Rebecca's gaze held mine, steady and unyielding, as she prepared to deliver the next blow. The air in the living room felt heavy, thick with unspoken tension, as Rebecca's fingers tightened ever so slightly around my hand. Her touch, meant to be comforting, carried an edge of insistence that made my chest tighten. She leaned forward, her voice soft but deliberate, as she outlined their proposal. Mom, what if David and I took on the big expenses for the house? His business is thriving now, and we could cover everything, the repairs, the property taxes, the insurance. You wouldn't have to carry that weight anymore. You could finally breathe, free from all the financial strain. Her words were laced with kindness, but they stirred a quiet unease deep within me. I forced a slow nod, my voice measured as I responded, That's incredibly generous of you both. My gaze drifted to the familiar walls of my home, the scuffed baseboards and faded wallpaper that held decades of memories. But this is my house. I can't just let you pay for everything. And the thought of relinquishing control over the place I'd built my life felt like surrendering a piece of my soul. David's smile was warm, but there was something patronizing in the tilt of his lips, a subtle assumption that he knew better. Mom Helen, he said, his tone smooth and reassuring, you've been carrying us for months, helping us get back on our feet. Let us do this for you. It's not just about helping you. It makes sense for us too. We're planning to stay here for the long haul, so covering these costs is really an investment in our future as much as yours. His words landed like a stone in my stomach. Their future in my house. The assumption that their stay was permanent had crept into their language, growing bolder with each conversation. When had I agreed to this? I searched my memory, trying to pinpoint the moment when their temporary stay, offered out of love and necessity, had morphed into an indefinite claim on my home. My heart thudded with a mix of confusion and betrayal, though I couldn't yet name the feeling. David's tone shifted, becoming brisk and businesslike as he continued. There's just one thing we'd need to sort out. For insurance purposes and to streamline the permits for the major repairs, it would be simpler if the house was in our name. It's purely a legal and financial matter, nothing more. The room fell silent. Even the old house, with its usual groans and creaks, seemed to pause, as if the walls themselves were stunned by his words. My breath caught, and I barely managed to whisper, "You want me to sign the house over to you?" Rebecca was quick to respond, her voice bright and soothing, as if she could smooth over the shock in my eyes. "Not permanently, Mom, just while we're handling the big expenses and the repairs. It's a common arrangement in situations like this. David's lawyer says it protects everyone and keeps the financial side clean and straightforward." David nodded eagerly, leaning forward in his chair. "Exactly, it's just a formality. You'd still live here, still be part of every decision. Legally, though, it would simplify everything. And down the road, when we're older and the kids are grown, we could always transfer it back or figure out another arrangement." When we're older. The phrase echoed in my mind, sharp and cutting, as if I weren't already older, already navigating the twilight of my life, where every decision felt like a battle to hold on to my independence. Their words painted me as frail, incapable, someone who needed to be managed by younger, more competent hands. My throat tightened with a mix of anger and hurt, but I swallowed it down, unwilling to let them see how deeply their assumptions wounded me. "I need to think about this," I said, my voice trembling as I tried to pull my hand from Rebecca's grasp. Her fingers tightened, just enough to notice, a silent plea for me to stay, to agree. "Of course, Mom," she said, her eyes wide with concern. "It's a big decision, but I really hope you'll see how much easier this would make things for all of us. No more worrying about repairs or taxes or insurance. No more stress about keeping up with this big old place. You could just relax, enjoy your retirement." Relax and enjoy your retirement. The words felt like a dismissal, a polite way of saying I should step aside, sit quietly in the corner, and be grateful while they claimed everything I'd worked for over a lifetime. My home, my sanctuary, the place where I'd raised my children and weathered every storm, reduced to a burden they were graciously offering to lift from my shoulders. David gathered his papers, neatly stacking them into a folder with a practiced motion. "Why don't you sleep on it?" he suggested, his voice light but edged with urgency. "We don't need an answer right away, but spring's coming, and it'd be smart to start on these repairs before winter rolls around again." That night I lay in the guest room, my guest room, though it felt less like mine with each passing day, staring at the ceiling. Shadows danced across the familiar cracks in the plaster, and my mind churned with conflicting thoughts. Everything they'd said sounded so reasonable, so caring. They were offering to ease the financial burdens that had kept me awake at night, the endless worry about how to afford the next repair or tax bill. They were promising security for me and a stable home for my grandchildren. Their generosity was undeniable, their logic impeccable. So why did I feel like I was being stripped of everything that mattered? Over the next few days, the pressure grew, subtle but relentless. Rebecca would casually mention how much easier it would be to coordinate contractors if David had the legal authority to sign contracts. David would point out small hazards around the house, a loose stair rail, a flickering light, that I'd supposedly overlooked, his tone implying I was too distracted or incapable to notice. Each conversation circled back to the same refrain. Everything would be simpler once the paperwork was sorted out. Even the children, innocent and unaware of the stakes, began to echo their parents' narrative. Emma, with her wide, curious eyes, asked me one morning why I looked so worried all the time. "Is it because the house is broken, Grandma Helen?" she said, her voice tinged with concern. Joshua, barely able to string sentences together, toddled through the rooms, calling them Daddy's office or Mommy's kitchen, as if the transfer of ownership had already taken root in his young mind. Their words, though guileless, cut deeper than Rebecca or David's calculated remarks. I tried to research the legal implications of signing over my house, but every attempt was thwarted. David had changed the internet passwords, citing security reasons, and my ancient computer was growing more unreliable by the day. When I asked to borrow his laptop, he always had a plausible excuse. It was updating or he needed it for work. My efforts to contact a lawyer independently met similar obstacles. The phone book had vanished from its usual spot, and when I tried to call directory assistance, Rebecca appeared as if by chance, offering to help me look up whatever I needed. One afternoon, I mentioned wanting to speak with an attorney about estate planning, hoping to broach the subject delicately. Rebecca's face clouded with concern, her voice dripping with sincerity. "Mom, these financial and legal matters can be so confusing," she said, placing a gentle hand on my arm. "I'd hate for you to get taken advantage of by some lawyer who doesn't have your best interests at heart. Let David and me help you find someone reputable." Reputable. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. I had no doubt that any lawyer they chose would align with their narrative, prioritizing their interests over mine. The realization settled over me like a fog. I was being systematically isolated, cut off from any voice that might challenge their plan. My home, my independence, my ability to make decisions for myself. They were all slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. The manufactured crises escalated with alarming speed. David announced he'd discovered a dangerous electrical issue that demanded immediate attention, his voice grave as he showed me a report I couldn't fully understand. Rebecca found signs of possible water damage in the basement, her tone urgent as she speculated about structural risks. Each day brought a fresh emergency, each problem requiring costly professional help that only their proposed arrangement could facilitate. "We really can't wait much longer on these repairs," David said during one of our increasingly tense family meetings, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "Some of these issues could become serious threats to the house and to you if we don't act soon." His words were a carefully crafted blend of concern and authority, but they felt like a trap, tightening around me with every passing moment. I sat there, my heart pounding, my hands trembling in my lap. The house I'd loved, the life I'd built, it was all slipping away, and I was running out of time to hold on to it. The looming threat of the house's disrepair weighed heavily on my mind, a constant reminder that inaction could spell disaster. With spring rains on the horizon, any water damage could spiral into a catastrophe, turning minor leaks into torrents that would ruin everything I'd worked for. The contractor's estimates had ballooned far beyond the already daunting $60,000 to $80,000 he'd first quoted. Now he was throwing around figures exceeding $100,000, insisting these were urgent fixes to prevent collapse. Those numbers felt surreal, like monopoly money, but the danger they implied was all too real. Fix this now or risk your family's safety. The thought of failure gnawed at me, a cold knot of fear in my chest. I suggested a home equity loan, my voice trembling with forced optimism, though doubt clouded my mind. Could my modest income even support such a debt? Rebecca, my daughter, looked at me with a mix of pity and frustration, her head shaking slowly. "Mom, at your age, with what you earn, no bank will approve a loan that size. Even if they did, the payments would crush you. You'd be scraping by, barely able to afford for groceries just to keep up with the mortgage." Her words stung, each one a reminder of my perceived frailty. At your age? There it was again, that gentle but relentless jab, as if I were already too old to be trusted with my own finances. To them, I was a risk, a liability, someone whose judgment couldn't be relied upon. The label clung to me like damp clothing, chilling and inescapable. David, my son-in-law, chimed in, his tone practical but laced with impatience. "If something happened to you, Mom, the kids would be left with a house tied to a massive mortgage. That's not fair to them. Our plan ensures the house gets fixed properly and everyone's future is secure." His words landed like a punch blow. "If something happened to you," the phrase echoed in my mind, turning my healthy, active life into a ticking clock. I was 62, vibrant, with years ahead of me, statistically speaking. Yet in their story, I was already frail, teetering on the edge of incapacity or worse. They weren't just planning for repairs, they were planning for my absence, as if my death were a logistical detail to be managed. The thought sent a shiver through me, not of fear, but of betrayal. The idea of moving to the basement surface seemed during one of these tense discussions, slipped into the conversation with a casualness that belied its weight. David leaned back in his chair, his voice thoughtful but calculated. "With all the renovations we're planning, It might be better for you to stay somewhere quieter in the house. The guest rooms are going to be a mess once the electrical work starts. Drills, rewiring, heavy equipment, workers traipsing through. You'd probably prefer a spot that's more private, peaceful. Rebecca nodded eagerly, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. The basement's actually really cozy once you fix it up. It's cooler in the summer, quieter, and you'd have your own space away from all the construction chaos. The basement. The word conjured images of cold concrete, damp air, and a single stingy window that barely let in a sliver of daylight. They were suggesting, no, that urging, that I'd relocate to the basement of my own home to make way for renovations I hadn't approved, pay paid for with money I hadn't agreed to spend, and funded by signing over ownership I hadn't consented to. Rebecca's voice softened, reassuring. It's just temporary, Mom. Just for the worst of the construction. A few months at most. A few months. Living underground, I'd be in my own basement while they reshaped my house above me, using my resources after I'd handed over my rights. The audacity of their plan hit me like a gust of icy wind. They weren't just fixing the house. They were isolating me, physically, financially, them, legally, and framing it as a kindness, a gift. I pushed back, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm not ready to decide anything yet. This is all happening too fast. I need time to think about my options. David's face shifted, his patience thinning, his tone turning brisk, almost corporate. Mom, Helen, I get that change is tough, but some of these repairs can't wait. The electrical issues could be a fire hazard. We can't risk something happening to Emma and Joshua, too. The children. Always the name children. They wielded Emma and Joshua like a trump card, knowing I couldn't argue against without seeming. I selfish-hearted. If I didn't hesitated, if I'd questioned, I'd be the reckless grandmother who'd valued her own comfort over safety grandchildren. The guilt they dangled was suffocating, a noose tightening with every word. Desperate, I pushed for control. Let me get a second opinion on the repairs. Maybe it's not as bad as your contractor says. Rebecca and David exchanged one of their silent looks, those loaded glances that had become their shorthand for dismissing my concerns. Rebecca's voice was smooth, placating. Of course, well, Mom, but I'm not sure how we'll fit that into the contractor's schedule. And honestly, David honestly knows construction. If he says it's serious, I trust him completely. His words cut deeper than I'd expected. She'd trusted David's judgment over mine, over my own knowledge of the house I'd lived in for 15 years, the creaks I'd knew by heart, the walls that held my memories. In her eyes, I was untrustworthy, unreliable, my instincts outdated, my resolve. That night, alone in my room, I made a choice decision that felt terrifying, exhilarating, and terrifying. I'd seek independent advice, no matter how they'd tried to gatekeep my choices. I'd fight for my home house, my independence, my dignity before they had stripped it away. But I'd have to be cautious, careful, strategic. The people I'd loved, who'd claimed to love me, were the ones most determined to ensure I'd never reclaimed my life. The next mornings, I waited, my heart pounding. Waited until Rebecca left for work, and David headed out for what he'd called a job site meeting. I pulled on my warmest coat, grabbed my purse, and walked out my front door of the house without a word. It was the first time in months I'd left without their permission approval, and the crisp air felt like freedom. My walk to Margaret Patterson's house took me 45 minutes. Each step felt like shedding a layer of their control. Margaret had been my friend since I'd been a young mother, since Rebecca was a gap to A in kid pigtails, one of the few of who'd seen me as Helen's first. Not just a mother or grandmother, Her tidy blue cottage, 8 blocks away, was a close enough for familiarity, but far enough to be off Rebecca's radar and David's. I'd walked there hundreds of times over the years, but today each step felt like a reclaiming of myself. When she opened the door, flour dusted her apron, and surprise lit up her face. "Helen, what a treat!" she exclaimed, pulling me inside. "I was just kneading some bread." "Come in, tell me everything." I stepped into her warm kitchen, the scent of rising dough wrapping around me like a hug, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. I was ready to unravel the truth about my situation and to find out if I could still escape the beautiful, suffocating trap my family had crafted for me. The kitchen was a haven of warmth, infused with the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and a hint of cinnamon that seemed to linger in the air like a soft embrace. I sat at Margaret's worn wooden table, my hands cradling a steaming mug of coffee, its heat seeping into my palms as if it could thaw the cold knot of anxiety that had settled in my chest for months. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could draw a full breath. The weight of the world momentarily lifted. The familiarity of this swish, its chipped mugs, the faint creak of the floorboards, the soft hum of the refrigerator, wrapped around me like a blanket, offering a fleeting sense of safety. Margaret moved about with her usual quiet efficiency, her presence a steady anchor as she gave me the space to gather my scattered thoughts. When she finally settled across from me, her own mug in hand, her eyes met mine with a gentle but piercing concern. "All right, Helen," she said, her voice soft yet deliberate. "What's been going on? You look like you've been carrying a mountain on your shoulders." The words tumbled out of me before I could stop them, a torrent of pent-up fear, confusion, and betrayal. I told her everything, how it had all started so innocently with Rebecca and David's offer to stay with me, their voices laced with love and worry about my ability to manage alone. I described how their presence in my home had slowly shifted from comforting to suffocating, how they'd taken over my routines, my mail, my decisions. I confessed the mounting pressure to sign over the deed to my house, their arguments about necessary repairs and my dwindling finances weaving a net I hadn't realized I was trapped in until it was nearly too late. As I spoke, I felt the weight of each moment I'd buried, the nights spent second-guessing myself, the quiet dread that had become my constant companion. Margaret listened without a single interruption, her face a mirror of growing unease, her brow furrowed deeper with every detail, her lips pressing into a thin line as she absorbed the gravity of my story. When I finally fell silent, my voice hoarse and my coffee gone cold, she didn't speak right away. The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable, as if she were carefully weighing her words. Then, with a tenderness that nearly undid me, she reached across the table and enveloped my hand in hers. "Helen, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady but laced with sorrow, "what you're describing isn't just wrong. It's elder abuse. Financial elder abuse, to be exact." The phrase hit me like a splash of icy water, shocking and disorienting. Elder abuse. I'd heard it before, always in the context of strangers, frail seniors preyed upon by heartless scammers or neglected by careless families. Never once had I imagined it could apply to me, a woman who'd raised a daughter, paid her bills, and kept her home for decades. And certainly not from Rebecca, my own flesh and blood, whose concern had seemed so genuine, so rooted in love. "But they're not hurting me," I protested, my voice trembling with denial. "They're trying to help me, Margaret. They're worried about the house, about me." Her expression softened, but there was a firmness in her eyes that brooked no argument. Helen taking over someone's finances, cutting them off from their friends, pressuring them to give up their home. That's abuse, even if it is dressed up as help, even if it's family. Before I could respond, she rose with purpose and disappeared into her study, returning moments later with a yellowed phone book, its pages curling at the edges. The sight of it was almost comical, a relic from a world before smartphones, but in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. "We're not sitting on this," she declared, her voice resolute. "First, we're calling in my nephew Thomas. He's a lawyer who knows elder law inside and out. Then we're getting in touch with Adult Protective Services to figure out your options." Her determination was infectious, a spark that began to rekindle my own resolve. That afternoon, we found ourselves in Thomas Patterson's office, a small but orderly space lined with books and framed diplomas. Thomas was in his 40s, with a serious demeanor softened by kind eyes that seemed to see right through to my fear and exhaustion. As I recounted my story again, this time with more clarity, he listened intently, jotting notes and asking precise questions about dates, conversations, and documents. His pen moved steadily across the page, and I felt a strange mix of relief and vulnerability, as if laying bare my life to this near stranger was both terrifying and necessary. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his tone measured but firm, "I need to ask you plainly, do you want to sign your house over to your daughter and son-in-law?" "No," I answered without hesitation, the word bursting from me with a certainty I hadn't realized I still possessed. "I don't. But they keep saying the repairs are urgent, that I can't afford them, that this is the only way." My voice wavered as I thought of David's earnest explanations, Rebecca's tearful pleas about my safety. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Let's break this down," he said. "Have you seen any of these contractor estimates yourself? Have you spoken directly to anyone who's claimed these problems exist?" The questions hung in the air, and with a sinking heart, I realized the truth. Every estimate, every dire warning about electrical faults or crumbling foundations had come through David. Not once had I met a contractor, seen a report with my own eyes, or heard a professional's voice confirm the crisis. Anger flared within me, hot and sharp, at how easily I'd trusted, how blindly I'd let them guide me. "I thought not," Thomas said, his voice grim but not judgmental. "That's a major red flag. Even if repairs are needed, signing over your deed is far from the only solution. There are loans, reverse mortgages, grants, options that let you keep your home." He pulled out a legal pad and began writing, his hand moving with the confidence of someone who'd navigated these waters before. "Here's our plan. I'll draft a power of attorney giving me temporary authority to handle your financial matters. This will stop anyone from pressuring you into signing anything while we investigate. Then we'll arrange for independent contractors to assess your property and determine what, if anything, actually needs fixing." "But what if they're right?" I asked, my voice small as doubt crept back in. "What if the house really is falling apart?" Thomas's gaze was steady, reassuring. "If that's the case, we'll find legitimate ways to address it without you losing your home. Mrs. Morrison, you're a capable adult with every right to control your property. No one, family or otherwise, can force you to give that up, no matter what they claim their intentions are." An hour later, Janet Williams from Adult Protective Services joined us. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps in her 30s, but her calm authority put me at ease. After reviewing Thomas's notes, she spoke with a clarity that cut through my lingering confusion. "Mrs. Morrison, what you've described shows several alarming patterns: isolation from your support network, control over your finances in mail, and coercion to relinquish your property. These are textbook tactics in financial exploitation cases." Her words were a painful confirmation of what Margaret and Thomas had already suggested, and yet hearing them from her felt like a final, undeniable truth. She outlined the steps ahead, emphasizing the importance of documenting everything and reestablishing my independence safely. "We can open an investigation," she said, "but your proactive steps will make it stronger." Margaret, who had been a quiet but steadfast presence throughout, finally spoke. "Helen, you're coming to stay with me for a few days. You need a clear head, free from their constant pressure." Her offer washed over me like a wave of relief, so profound it brought tears to my eyes. The thought of a safe bed, of mornings without David's urgent updates or Rebecca's hovering concern, felt like a luxury I'd forgotten I deserved. Thomas began preparing the necessary documents, while Janet explained how to file a formal complaint if needed. "We'll proceed carefully," she cautioned. "Cases like this, with family involved, can be tricky. They'll likely claim they're acting for your benefit, so we need solid evidence." By 5 that afternoon, we had a concrete plan. Thomas would send a certified letter to Rebecca and David, formally revoking any informal financial arrangements and directing all property-related discussions through him. Janet would begin a preliminary investigation into their control over my finances, starting with my mail. I would stay with Margaret, rebuilding my confidence until I was ready to reclaim my home. The most daunting step was calling Rebecca to inform her of my whereabouts. My stomach churned as I dialed her number, my heart racing with a mix of guilt and determination. Her response was swift, her voice a blend of confusion and indignation. "Mom, what are you doing?" Margaret called and said, "You're staying with her. But that makes no sense. Why would you leave when we're in the middle of planning all these repairs? David's really worried about the electrical situation." I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the familiar pull of her words, and began to respond, clinging to the newfound clarity I'd gained in that warm kitchen and the promise of reclaiming my life. I drew in a deep breath, steadying myself before speaking. Rebecca, I need some time to process everything we've talked about. I'm not okay with the plan you and David have laid out, and I want to look into other possibilities. My voice trembled slightly, but I held firm, gripping the phone tightly as if it could anchor my resolve. On the other end, Rebecca's tone shifted to that familiar blend of patience and subtle condescension that always set my nerves on edge. Mom, I think you're misunderstanding our intentions here. We're not trying to strip you of anything. We're just trying to ease the burden of responsibilities that are getting too heavy for you to carry on your own. Her words dripped with a practiced sincerity, but they felt like a script she'd rehearsed too many times. The implications stung, that I was too frail, too confused to manage my own life. I'm not confused, I shot back, my voice rising with a strength that surprised even me. I understand exactly what you're proposing, and I'm not interested in signing my house over to anyone. The words felt like a declaration, a line drawn in the sand after weeks of tiptoeing around their assumptions. My home wasn't just a building, it was decades of memories, independence, and hard-earned security. The thought of handing it over made my chest tighten with a mix of fear and defiance. A heavy silence stretched across the line. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice had shed its gentle veneer, replaced by a sharp, almost desperate edge. Mom, this isn't just about you anymore. We've made commitments based on our conversations. David's already reached out to contractors, secured financing, and made plans. You can't just back out now and leave us in the lurch. Her words landed like a slap, revealing a truth I hadn't fully grasped until that moment. They'd been moving forward without my explicit consent, treating my agreement as a foregone conclusion. The audacity of it, the way they'd assumed my signature was a mere formality, ignited a slow burn of anger deep in my gut. Rebecca, I said, my tone measured but firm, I never agreed to sign over the house. We talked about it, yes, but I never said yes. My heart pounded as I spoke, each word a reclamation of my agency. I could almost hear her disbelief through the phone, followed by a sharp, humorless laugh that cut through the line like a blade. Mom, come on, you've been living with this plan for weeks. You asked us to take over the household bills, handle the repairs, and manage the financial decisions. What did you think that meant? Her voice was laced with exasperation, as if I were a child who'd missed the obvious. But I hadn't missed anything. I thought they were helping me, offering support while I continued to live in my own home. Instead, they'd interpreted my reliance as a gradual surrender of ownership, a transfer of authority in exchange for their assistance. The realization hit me like a cold wave. We'd been having entirely different conversations, and they'd been steering me toward their version of the truth with a calculated precision that left me reeling. I need you to come home, Rebecca pressed, her tone softening into a pleading quality that felt more strategic than sincere. Emma keeps asking where Grandma Helen is, and Joshua is so confused. You're upsetting the kids by leaving like this. The mention of my grandchildren, Emma's wide, curious eyes, and Joshua's shy smile sent a pang through my heart. But this time, instead of guilt, I felt a surge of anger. She was wielding their love for me like a weapon, trying to manipulate me into compliance. It was a tactic that had worked before, but now it felt like a betrayal of the bond we shared. The kids will be fine, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside me. I'll see them soon, but right now I need space to figure things out. The words felt like a shield, protecting the fragile clarity I was beginning to reclaim. Figure what out? Rebecca snapped, her frustration boiling over. Mom, there's nothing to figure out. We're family. We're trying to help you. Why are you making this so complicated? Her words echoed in my mind, but they no longer held the power they once did. Help wasn't help if it came with strings attached. Generosity that demanded my independence as payment wasn't generosity at all. For the first time, I saw the difference between being cared for and being controlled, and the distinction lit a fire in me that refused to be extinguished. I'll call you in a few days, I said, my voice calm but resolute. Please don't come to Margaret's house. I need this time to think. Before she could respond, I hung up, my hands trembling from the adrenaline coursing through me. Standing up to Rebecca felt like stepping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Margaret appeared with a steaming cup of tea and settled beside me on her worn, cozy couch. "That sounded tough," she said softly, her eyes full of quiet understanding. "I've never spoken to her like that before," I admitted, staring into the tea as if it held answers. "I've never just refused to do what she thought was best for me." The weight of that truth settled over me, both heavy and liberating. For so long, I'd let Rebecca's confidence and certainty shape my decisions, trusting her judgment over my own. But now I was beginning to see how much I'd given up in the process. Margaret's smile was tinged with sadness. "Maybe it's time you started." Her words were gentle, but they carried a quiet strength that bolstered my own. That night, I slept in Margaret's guest room, wrapped in clean sheets and a warm quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. For the first time in months, I felt truly rested. There was no one hovering over me, no one questioning my choices, no one subtly suggesting that my age made me unfit to decide my own future. In the stillness of that room, I could finally think clearly about what I wanted, not what everyone else thought I needed. The freedom of it was intoxicating, like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a stuffy room for too long. The next morning, Thomas called with an update that made my stomach lurch. "I've gone through your financial records, Helen, and there are some troubling discrepancies. Several of your bills have been paid from accounts you didn't authorize, and there are charges on your credit cards that you didn't make. It's not necessarily criminal, but it's definitely unauthorized use of your resources." His voice was calm, professional, but the implications of his words sent a chill down my spine. "What kind of charges?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Home improvement supplies, contractor deposits, even some personal purchases that seem to be for Rebecca and David," he replied. "The pattern suggests they've been using your accounts pretty freely, likely justifying it as shared household expenses." The scope of it, thousands of dollars, money I'd spent decades saving, spent without my knowledge on improvements to my own home that would benefit the very people trying to take it from me, left me breathless. The audacity was staggering, a betrayal that cut deeper than I could have imagined. "What can we do?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and fury. "First, we're changing all your passwords and account numbers. I've already started that process," Thomas said. "Second, we'll demand a full accounting of every cent they've spent and documentation for every repair they claim was necessary. Third, if they don't cooperate, we'll consider filing criminal charges for financial exploitation." The words "criminal charges" against my own daughter made my heart ache, but they also fueled the anger simmering inside me. I'd raised Rebecca to be honest, to respect others' autonomy. How had she become someone who could justify stealing from her own mother while calling it love? That afternoon, David showed up at Margaret's house. From the window, I watched as he knocked persistently on the front door, his face shifting from concern to frustration to outright anger when no one answered. Each knock felt like a demand, an attempt to reclaim control. Margaret had suggested we stay quiet, and after 20 minutes of knocking and calling my name, he finally left, his shoulders slumped, but his jaw set in determination. The sight of him retreating gave me a strange mix of relief and unease. Rebecca took a different approach, calling Margaret directly. From the kitchen, where I was pretending to read a book, I could hear Margaret's calm, measured responses. "No, Rebecca, I don't think that's a good idea. She's not refusing to see you. She just needs some space. I understand you're worried, but pressuring her won't help. Yes, I'll pass along your message, but I won't force her to call you back." When Margaret hung up and found me, she sighed. "She wants you to know Emma's asking for you and that they're willing to compromise on the house." The mention of Emma tugged at my heart, but I knew it was another attempt to pull me back into their orbit. Compromise, to them, likely meant agreeing to their terms with minor concessions. But I was done compromising my independence. For the first time in a long time, I was ready to fight for what was mine. Not just my house, but my right to decide my own future. The word compromise struck me like a slap, as if holding on to the home I'd poured my life into was some radical stance that needed to be bartered away. My refusal to sign over everything I'd built wasn't stubbornness. It was survival, a desperate grip on the one thing that still felt like mine. Yet there they were, acting as if my resistance was a problem, to be smoothed over with concessions. When I pressed for details, my voice tight with dread I didn't want to show, Rebecca stayed vague. She tossed out some nonsense about me retaining partial ownership, while they took on all the burdens of managing the property. Her tone dripped with false generosity, as if offering me a sliver of my own home was a grand favor. Partial ownership. The audacity of it burned in my chest, my home, my sanctuary, reduced to a minority stake in exchange for their control over my life. Every word she spoke revealed their true colors, and with each revelation, I felt a surge of gratitude that I'd slipped out of their grasp before putting my name on any dotted line. The betrayal wasn't just a sting, it was a wound that deepened with every memory of their calculated kindness. That Friday, the independent contractor assessments began, a lifeline thrown to me by Thomas, who'd seen through the fog of their lies from the start. He arranged for 3 professionals to inspect my house, each tasked with giving me the unfiltered truth about its condition. I met them at the property while Rebecca was at work and David was supposedly off at a job site, though I was starting to doubt anything he claimed. The first contractor, Bob Martinez, carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years reading the bones of houses. He moved through my home with a meticulous eye, his footsteps echoing in the familiar rooms as he checked walls, floors, and fixtures. After 2 hours, he sat with me at my kitchen table, his notepad filled with careful observations. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice steady but warm, "your house is in remarkable shape for its age. There's a window that could use some recaulking, and one gutter's pulling slightly from the roofline. But these are minor. Nothing here screams emergency or safety hazard." Relief flooded me, so intense I nearly broke down right there. My hands trembled as I clutched my coffee mug, the warmth grounding me. "What about the foundation?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I was told there were serious settling issues." Bob's brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. "I didn't see any foundation problems. The basement's dry, the floors are level, no cracks, no signs of structural movement. Whoever told you that was either mistaken or lying." Lying. The word landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the air between us. David hadn't been mistaken. He'd crafted a fiction, a web of urgent repairs and imaginary safety hazards designed to scare me into signing away my home. The electrical system? "Up to code and perfectly functional," Bob said, shaking his head. "It's not brand new, but it's safe and more than adequate for your needs." The second and third contractors echoed his findings, their reports painting a picture of a home that was solid, cared for, and far from the crumbling disaster David had described. The 100,000 in repair estimates he'd waved in front of me? Pure fabrication, conjured to justify stripping me of everything I'd worked for. After they left, I sat alone in my kitchen, the familiar creak of the chair beneath me, a reminder of the life I'd built here. This was the room where I'd been manipulated, where David and Rebecca had spun their lies for months, exploiting my love for my grandchildren and my fear of becoming a burden. The realization didn't just spark anger. It ignited a fury I'd never known, a deep, smoldering rage that burned not just at their betrayal, but at their arrogance, their belief they could steal from me while cloaking it in love. That evening, Thomas called with news that tightened the knot in my stomach. He'd been digging into David's construction business, and the picture was grim. "There are red flags everywhere," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "Lawsuits from clients claiming he took payments for work he never finished. His business license was suspended twice for unpaid taxes, and there are liens against his personal property for debts he hasn't settled." The truth crystallized. David wasn't a struggling contractor hit by bad luck. He was a failing businessman drowning in debt, and my house wasn't just a home to him. It was a lifeline, an asset he could seize, renovate with my money, and maybe even sell or borrow against to bail himself out. The betrayal cut deeper as I thought of Rebecca. "Did she know?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of hope and dread. Thomas paused, the silence heavy. "It's hard to say definitively, but they've been working so closely on this. It's unlikely she was completely in the dark. At the very least, she knew they were pressuring you to sign over your property and went along with it." The words landed like a punch, stealing my breath. My own daughter, complicit in this scheme, had chosen to prioritize their gain over my security. That night, as I lay in the guest room at Margaret's house, staring at the ceiling, I made a vow. I wouldn't just shield myself from their manipulation. I'd make sure they answered for it. The lies, the theft, the emotional warfare, they'd pay for all of it. The next morning, Janet Williams, a caseworker with a calm, professional demeanor, arrived at Margaret's to take my formal statement. I poured out everything, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I handed over bank statements showing unauthorized transactions, the fake repair estimates David had waved like a weapon, and detailed notes I'd kept about the months of isolation they had orchestrated. Janet listened, her eyes softening with sympathy but sharpening with concern as the scope of their actions became clear. "Mrs. Morrison," she said when I finished, her tone measured but firm, "this is one of the clearest cases of financial elder abuse I've seen. The pattern is textbook. Gain the victim's trust, cut them off from their support network, invent crises to force action, then present handing over assets as the only solution." She outlined the next steps, a formal investigation, likely criminal charges, and warned me it wouldn't be easy. "Your daughter and son-in-law will claim they were acting in your best interest. Family members often close ranks around the accused in cases like this." I thought of Emma and Joshua, my grandchildren, their innocent faces flashing in my mind. Pursuing this would fracture family ties, turn gatherings into battlegrounds, and maybe cost me relationships I cherished. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. But the alternative, losing my home, my independence, my dignity, was a price I refused to pay. "I understand," I told her, my voice resolute. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Monday morning brought the confrontation I'd both dreaded and anticipated. Rebecca and David showed up at Margaret's unannounced, their faces set with determination, as if ignoring my request for space would somehow bend me to their will. From the window, I watched them stride up the walkway, their steps purposeful, almost defiant. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and fury surging through me. They'd come to push harder, to tighten the screws, but I wasn't the same woman they'd manipulated for months. I was armed with the truth now, and I wouldn't let them rewrite it. As I opened the door to face them, the weight of their betrayal settled into my bones. But so did my resolve. This wasn't just about saving my home anymore. It was about reclaiming my life from the people who tried to steal it while claiming they loved me. I stood at the threshold of my own home, the weight of the moment pressing against my chest like a stone. The doorbell had rung again, just as it had so many times before, each chime carrying the entitled expectations of those who believed they had a claim to what was mine. This time I didn't hesitate. I opened the door myself, my hands steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Margaret, my steadfast friend, lingered just behind me, her presence a quiet reassurance. But I knew this confrontation was mine to face alone. The familiar faces of my daughter, Rebecca, and her husband, David, stood before me, their expressions a mix of impatience and barely concealed frustration. Rebecca didn't waste a moment on pleasantries. "Mom, this has gone on long enough," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the crisp morning air. "You need to come home and stop this nonsense. The kids are upset, David's contractors are waiting, and you're making everything harder for everyone." Her words stung, not just for their tone, but for the accusation embedded within them. That my resistance, my insistence on protecting what was mine, was somehow a selfish act, an inconvenience to their carefully laid plans. I felt a flicker of hurt, quickly swallowed by resolve. How dare they frame my defense of my own life as a burden? I met her gaze, my voice calm but unyielding. "Rebecca, I'm not going anywhere until we sort this out. I've learned that the repair estimates David gave me were fabricated. I had 3 independent contractors, each with decades of experience, inspect the house. They all agree there's nothing urgent, no major repairs needed. My home is in excellent condition." The words felt like a shield, each fact a carefully placed stone in the wall I was building to protect myself. David's face flushed a deep crimson, his jaw tightening as if my words had struck a nerve. "That's absurd," he snapped, his voice rising with indignation. "I know construction, Helen. I know when a house has problems. Your so-called contractors don't have a clue what they're talking about. His defensiveness only fueled my determination. I could see the cracks in his confidence, the way his eyes darted to Rebecca for support. I held my ground, my voice steady as I countered. 3 separate professionals, David, 3. All with years of expertise, all saying the same thing. My house doesn't need the kind of work Chayayawa have been pushing for. I watched Rebecca's expression shift, a flicker of doubt crossing her face before it hardened into something defensive, almost desperate. Even if the issues aren't as bad as we thought, she said, her tone softening but still insistent. That doesn't change the fact that you're struggling to manage this place on your own. You need help, Mom, whether you're ready to admit it or not. Her words pierced me, not because they were true, but because they echoed the doubts they'd planted in me over months of subtle manipulation. I felt a pang of sadness, remembering the countless times I'd questioned my own strength, my own judgment, under their relentless pressure. I do need help, I admitted. My voice was softer now, but not weak. But not the kind of help that demands I sign over my home. Not the kind that involves using my credit cards without my consent, opening my mail, or keeping me from leaving my own house. The accusations hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. David stepped forward, his patience fraying like a worn rope. Look, Helen, he said, his voice tight with exasperation. We've bent over backward to help you. We've taken care of your house, paid your bills, handled everything. The least you could do is show a little gratitude instead of throwing around these wild accusations. His words were a slap, dismissing my evidence as if it were nothing more than the ramblings of a confused old woman. But I wasn't confused. I was awake, painfully aware of every betrayal. Wild accusations? I repeated, my voice still steady, though inside I felt a surge of anger mixed with grief. David, I have bank statements showing thousands of dollars in unauthorized charges on my accounts. I have reports from contractors proving your estimates were lies. I have proof you've been intercepting my mail and controlling what I see, what I know. These aren't accusations. They're facts. For the first time, I saw something shift in their eyes. Not just anger or defensiveness, but a glimmer of fear. They'd been so sure of their hold over me, so convinced I'd never push back, that they'd grown careless, leaving a trail of evidence I'd meticulously gathered. Rebecca's face softened, and she tried a different tactic, her voice trembling with what I knew was a calculated appeal to my heart. Mom, please, we're family. Families work through things together. Don't let lawyers and social workers turn you against your own daughter. Her words cut deep, not because I believed her, but because they twisted the love I'd always had for her into a weapon. I felt the ache of betrayal, the weight of realizing that my own daughter had used my devotion to her and her children to erode my autonomy. For months, I doubted myself, wondering if I was too old, too frail, too incapable to manage my own life. But now, standing in my doorway, I saw clearly. They hadn't just turned me against myself, they'd tried to erase me. Rebecca, I said, my voice heavy with sorrow, you turned me against myself first. You made me question my own mind, my own worth. You used my love for you and the kids to manipulate me into giving up everything I've built. That's not what family does. The words felt like a release, a reclaiming of the truth I'd buried under their lies. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the papers Thomas, my lawyer, had prepared. Handing them to David, I said, this is a cease and desist order. You are to have no further contact with my bank, no access to my mail, and no authority over my property. Any more unauthorized actions will lead to criminal charges. David's face drained of color as he scanned the document, his hands trembling slightly. Rebecca leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the pages, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like fear. For a moment, I felt a twinge of pity for her, my daughter, caught in a web of her own making. You're making a huge mistake, David said, his voice low and tight, barely containing his fury. We were trying to help you, and this is how you repay us? With lawyers and threats of criminal charges? His words were meant to intimidate, but they only strengthened my resolve. I'm repaying your help by protecting myself from further exploitation, I replied, my voice firm. If your help was genuine, you'd have no problem accounting for every dollar you've spent, every decision you've made in my name." I watched as Rebecca's composure finally shattered. "Fine," she snapped, her voice breaking with anger and desperation. "If this is how you want to play it, don't expect us to keep taking care of you. Don't expect us to be there when you really need help. And don't expect the kids to understand why Grandma Helen chose strangers over family." Her words were a dagger aimed at the deepest part of my heart. The thought of losing Emma's bright laughter, Joshua's warm hugs, the joy of watching them grow, it was almost enough to make me falter. I pictured holidays alone, birthdays without their smiling faces, a future stripped of the connections that had defined so much of my life. But then I thought of the alternative, a life where I was relegated to my own basement, my every move watched, my love for my grandchildren weaponized to keep me in line, a life where Helen Morrison faded away, replaced by a compliant shadow who caused no trouble and asked for nothing. "Rebecca," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest, "if you use those children against me, you'll be teaching them that love comes with conditions, that family loyalty means accepting abuse. Is that the lesson you want them to learn?" For a moment, she stared at me, and I saw a flicker of the daughter I'd raised, the one who'd once looked up to me, who'd learned from me what it meant to be strong, to stand up for herself. I'd sacrificed everything to give her a life of opportunity, loved her even when her choices broke my heart. For that brief second, I thought I saw her, the real Rebecca, horrified by the person she'd become. But then David touched her arm, his presence pulling her back into their shared narrative. "Come on," he said, his voice cold. "We don't need to stand here and take this." He turned to me, his eyes blazing with hostility. "You'll regret this, Helen. When you're alone in this house with no one to help you, remember that you chose this." They turned and walked away, their footsteps echoing on the path. I stood in the doorway, watching them go, my heart heavy, but my resolve unbroken. This wasn't the end, but it was a beginning, a reclaiming of my life, my home, my dignity. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for the woman I'd always been, the one who'd raised a family, built a life, and refused to be erased. As David and Rebecca vanished from my doorstep, their departure was as resolute as their initial intrusion into my life. Watching them go, my heart wrestled with a storm of emotions, grief for what was lost, yet a soaring sense of freedom I hadn't tasted in years. Their exit left an echo of emptiness, but also a canvas of possibility stretched before me. Margaret, my steadfast friend, draped her arm around my shoulders, her warmth anchoring me in the moment. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle but probing. I paused, letting the question sink deep, sifting through the layers of my soul. Sorrow clung to me like damp fog, mourning the pains unfrayed and torn by betrayal. Anger simmered beneath, a slow burn fueled by the deceit I'd endured, the trust I'd so naively extended. Fear whispered of an uncertain future, a path uncharted and daunting. Yet buried under this tangle of pain, a spark flickered, something unfamiliar, fragile but undeniable. Freedom. "I feel like I'm finding myself again," I admitted, my voice soft but steady, as if speaking it aloud made it real. The legal battle that followed stretched over 6 grueling months, each day a test of resilience. David faced charges of financial exploitation of an elderly person, theft, and fraud, words that felt as sharp as knives, cutting through the illusion of family. Rebecca, his accomplice, was charged as an accessory, her complicity a wound of its own. In the end, they pleaded guilty to lesser charges, their punishment a bitter compromise, full restitution of the money they'd siphoned from me, and a court-ordered agreement to sever contact for 2 years. The Gavels van Marchand was both a victory and a reminder of the cost. Returning to my house was like stepping back into an old, cherished skin. I reclaimed my bedroom, where sunlight spilled through familiar curtains, and my routines, which grounded me like roots in fertile soil. My independence, once stolen, now felt like a treasure I'd unearthed. The repairs I chose were modest, each decision a deliberate act of ownership. A fresh coat of paint breathed new life into the guest room, updated fixtures gleamed in the bathroom, and a modern heating system warmed the basement. The contractors had been right. My house was solid, safe, a sanctuary that had weathered the storm. It stood as a testament to my endurance, its walls echoing my resolve. Yet the deepest scar was the absence of Emma and Joshua, my grandchildren, their laughter now a memory locked behind the no-contact order. Rebecca's adherence to the agreement severed that thread, and the loss ached like a phantom limb. Margaret, ever wise, sat with me through the pain, her words a lifeline. "This isn't forever," she said, her eyes steady. "Kids grow up. They'll find their own truths, make their own choices." Her reassurance was a seed of hope, planted in the certainty that one day when they were ready, I could share my story and let them judge for themselves. In the meantime, I rebuilt my life with intention, brick by brick. I rejoined my book club, where lively debates over novels rekindled my love for stories. Volunteering at the Literacy Center brought purpose, each student's progress a small triumph. Friends I'd been cut off from welcomed me back, their familiar faces a balm to my isolation. I enrolled in a watercolor painting class, where brushstrokes became a language for emotions I couldn't yet name. A trip to Arizona to visit my sister filled me with desert sun and sisterly laughter. I even mastered the computer enough to video chat with old friends, their pixelated smiles bridging miles. Each step was a reclamation, a defiance of the shadows that had tried to dim me. Most profoundly, I learned to trust my instincts again. The woman who'd been manipulated, who doubted her own mind, was gone. In her place stood someone resolute, unafraid to speak her truth. I was still Helen Morrison, retired teacher, grandmother, keeper of stories, but I was also something new, a survivor who'd clawed her way back to herself. The deed to my house remained in my name, a symbol of my sovereignty. Should I ever need help managing my affairs, it would be on my terms, from people I chose who honored my dignity and autonomy. The hardest lesson was this: those who claim to love you most can sometimes be the ones who erode your life piece by piece under the guise of care. David and Rebecca's betrayal taught me to distinguish control from compassion, manipulation from devotion. But I also learned that it's never too late to fight back, to reclaim what's yours, to rediscover the core of who you are beneath the noise of others' expectations. I was Helen Morrison, and I was enough.